Who is Helen of Troy in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey? Everything you need to know. Warning: this video contains spoilers for Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, along with discussion of Greek mythology and characters featured in the film. If you're avoiding spoilers, this is your warning. Now, let's explain. More than 3,000 years after her legend was first told, Helen of Troy is still one of the most famous women in history. She has been called the face that launched 1,000 ships, the woman whose beauty sparked the greatest war in Greek mythology, a queen, a prisoner, a goddess chosen favorite, or perhaps simply a victim of fate. Depending on which version of the myth you believe, Helen was either the woman who abandoned her husband for love or someone taken against her will into a conflict she never wanted. Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey brings Helen back to the big screen in a fresh adaptation of Homer's epic poem. Although she isn't the central character, her story is the reason everything else happens. Without Helen, there would be no Trojan War. Without the Trojan War, Odysseus would never begin the dangerous journey that defines one of the greatest adventures ever written. In Nolan's film, Helen of Troy is portrayed by Academy Award winner Lupita Nyong'o, who also plays Helen's sister, Clytemnestra, in a remarkable dual role. But who exactly was Helen? Why was she considered the most beautiful woman in the world? Did she willingly leave with Paris? Or was she simply caught in a struggle between gods and kings? And what happened to Helen after the Trojan War finally ended? Let's explain. The birth of Helen of Troy. Helen's story begins long before the Trojan War. According to Greek mythology, she was the daughter of Zeus, the king of the gods, and Queen Leda of Sparta. One of the most famous myths tells that Zeus visited Leda in the form of a swan. Soon afterward, she laid 2 mysterious eggs. From those eggs came Helen and her siblings. Because of her divine parentage, Helen was believed to possess extraordinary beauty unlike any other mortal woman. As she grew older, stories of her beauty spread throughout Greece. Princes, kings, and warriors traveled from distant kingdoms hoping to win her hand in marriage. Everyone wanted Helen to become their queen. But choosing one husband created a dangerous problem. Every rejected prince could become an enemy. To prevent future conflict, the Greek kings agreed to a remarkable promise known as the Oath of Tyndareus. Every suitor swore to defend Helen's chosen husband if anyone ever tried to steal her away. No one imagined that promise would eventually lead to one of mythology's greatest wars. Helen becomes Queen of Sparta. Helen eventually married King Menelaus, ruler of Sparta. Together they became one of the most powerful royal couples in Greece. For several years, their kingdom enjoyed peace and prosperity. But everything changed when a Trojan prince named Paris arrived in Sparta. Paris had already been promised something extraordinary. Earlier, he had judged a contest between 3 powerful goddesses. Hera offered him wealth and political power. Athena promised wisdom and victory in battle. Aphrodite offered him the love of the most beautiful woman on earth. Paris accepted Aphrodite's offer. That decision changed history forever. Did Helen leave willingly? This is one of the biggest mysteries in Greek mythology. Ancient writers never completely agreed on what happened. One version says Helen fell deeply in love with Paris after Aphrodite influenced her emotions. She willingly sailed with him to Troy. Another version tells a very different story. Helen was kidnapped and taken against her will while Menelaus was away. Some myths even claim the gods manipulated everyone involved, making the conflict unavoidable from the very beginning. Christopher Nolan's film wisely avoids choosing one definitive answer. Instead, Helen becomes a symbol of how history often remembers events differently depending on who tells the story. That ambiguity has fascinated historians and storytellers for centuries. Even today, no single interpretation is considered the only correct one. Why the Trojan War began. When King Menelaus discovered Helen was gone, he demanded her return. Troy refused. Menelaus then called upon every Greek king who had sworn the Oath of Tyndareus. One by one, the greatest warriors in Greece gathered their armies. Among them were Achilles, Ajax, Agamemnon, Nestor, Diomedes, and the brilliant strategist Odysseus. More than 1,000 ships sailed across the Aegean Sea toward Troy. The conflict that followed lasted 10 long years. Cities were destroyed. Entire generations were lost. Legendary heroes became famous. Others disappeared into history forever. Although Helen never fought in the war herself, her name became forever connected to its beginning. Why Helen matters in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Some viewers may wonder why Helen appears at all when the movie focuses on Odysseus. The answer is simple. She is the reason Odysseus leaves home in the first place. Before the Trojan War, Odysseus ruled peacefully, alongside his wife Penelope and their young son Telemachus. When Helen disappeared, he honored his oath and joined the Greek alliance. He spent 10 years fighting outside the walls of Troy. Then, after finally helping win the war through the famous Trojan horse strategy, he expected to return home. Instead, another 10 years of suffering awaited him. Poseidon cursed his journey. Monsters attacked his ships. Storms scattered his crew. The Cyclops, Circe, Calypso, Scylla, Charybdis, and countless other dangers delayed his return. Everything began because of the war. And the war began because of Helen. Her influence stretches across the entire story, even when she isn't on screen. Lupita Nyong'o's dual performance. Christopher Nolan made an unusual creative decision by casting Lupita Nyong'o as both Helen of Troy and her sister Clytemnestra. Although the sisters share the same royal family, their lives unfold in dramatically different ways. Helen becomes remembered as the woman linked to the Trojan War. Clytemnestra becomes known for taking revenge against her husband Agamemnon after he returns from Troy. By asking one actress to portray both women, Nolan creates a fascinating parallel. Both sisters lived through unimaginable tragedy. Both were forever changed by war. Yet history remembers each of them for very different reasons. It's a subtle artistic choice that adds emotional depth without changing the original mythology. Was Helen really to blame? For centuries, Helen has often been blamed for causing the Trojan War. But many modern historians and mythology scholars argue that this isn't entirely fair. Wars are rarely started by one individual. Kings made political decisions. Armies chose to fight. Powerful rulers refused compromise. The gods themselves constantly interfered in human affairs. Helen became the symbol of the conflict, but she wasn't necessarily its true cause. Many ancient texts even portray her as deeply regretful for everything that happened. She mourns the countless lives lost because of events she could no longer control. Seen this way, Helen becomes less of a villain and more of a tragic figure trapped between destiny, politics, and divine intervention. What happened after the war? Unlike many famous heroes, Helen survived. After Troy fell, Menelaus eventually forgave her. The two returned to Sparta and resumed their lives as king and queen. Their ending stands in sharp contrast to many others. Achilles never returned home. Ajax met a tragic fate. Agamemnon was murdered after reaching Mycenae. Odysseus wandered the seas for another decade, before finally seeing Ithaca again. Helen's survival reminds us that victory in war doesn't always erase its emotional scars. Even after peace returned, the memories of Troy remained with everyone who lived through it. So, who is Helen of Troy in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey? She is portrayed by Lupita Nyong'o, who also plays Clytemnestra in one of the film's most interesting casting decisions. Although Helen appears only briefly, her importance cannot be overstated. She is the spark that ignites the Trojan War, the reason Odysseus leaves Ithaca, and ultimately, the beginning of one of the greatest adventures ever told. Whether you see her as a queen, a victim, or a legendary beauty caught in the plans of gods and kings, Helen remains one of mythology's most unforgettable figures. What do you think? Was Helen truly responsible for the Trojan War? Or has history unfairly blamed her for a conflict driven by the ambitions of powerful men and the will of the gods? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more The Odyssey explainers, Greek mythology stories, movie breakdowns, hidden details, and entertainment news. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.